Coming up next is the Dr. Kim Taylor Show. Here's your chance to talk about what matters to you. Although you'll receive helpful advice from Dr. Kim, remember this is not to be construed as any form of psychotherapy, diagnosis or treatment, and cannot replace a therapeutic relationship with a mental health professional. You can reach Dr. Kim by calling 564-1290 or 866-564-1290. You can also listen live on the internet at drkimtaylorshow.com. Now, here's Dr. Kim.
Today, this show is especially for women. We are going to be talking about what holds women back from being their best self and showing their brilliance to the world, enabling them to live a big life, to play it big, and to love big. Are you someone who has felt lost and not known what direction to pursue? Do you find plenty of ways to hold yourself back because you don't really believe that you deserve to have it all or to pursue what you truly want? You know, whether this is in a relationship, a career, or just life, do you tend to play it safe and listen to your inner critic that taunts you with your greatest fears, telling you you're not good enough, smart enough, or no one will really care? Well, stay tuned because today my guest is Tara Mohr. She's the author of Playing Big, Find Your Voice, Your Mission, and Your Message. She's a groundbreaking women's leadership expert and popular conference speaker, and she gives women the practical skills to voice and implement the changes they want to see in themselves and in the world at large. She writes about women who find plenty of ways to hold themselves back and play life a bit smaller than they deserve. So how can you move past self-doubt and move into living with a sense of greater freedom to express yourself and follow your dreams? Today we're talking about breaking the negative cycle and helping you to know what playing big truly means to you by listening to your own voice and following your own dreams. So you're not going to want to miss this program today. If you have a question and would like to join in, just give me a call at 805-564-1290 or send in your questions via my email at drkim@drkimtaylorshow.com. I'm going to be right back with my guests after this short break. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor, and this is the Dr. Kim Taylor Show.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
My guest is Tara Mohr, and she is an expert on women's leadership and well-being. And she is the creator of Playing Big, which is a leadership program for women, which now has over 1,000 graduates from around the world. Her book, Playing Big, Find Your Voice, Your Mission, Your Message, named as a best book of 2014 by Apple's iBooks. And this is where she really shares her program about how to help women go from playing it small or being held back by their fear and self-doubt to really starting to play it big and taking a very bold action to pursue what you see as your calling. She is a certified coach with an MBA from Stanford University and an undergraduate degree in English literature from Yale. Tara, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me today.
In your book, Playing Big, you say that there is an epidemic of women who are playing it small. What do you really mean by this?
That really came out of my own experience. As a young woman, I had finished graduate school. I went out into the working world, and I joined a large organization that had a lot of brilliant women working in philanthropy and in the social sector. And over time, I started to notice how many of these women were not really sharing their ideas, weren't speaking up, didn't see themselves as the right one for that promotion or leadership role. And at the same time, many of our male colleagues who had less experience or had thought about their ideas for a much shorter time were confidently putting those ideas forward and being recognized for them. And then I looked around my friends and I looked in the mirror and I realized how many of us were really playing small relative to our capabilities. And that set me on a journey to start working with women around this issue. And I really have found it to be an epidemic. So many of us resonate with this idea. We know we could be playing bigger, and we feel called to it and worried it's going to be exhausting and afraid of it too.
You're seeing this as it mainly affects women. What is it about either the way that we grow up or that we are socialized that really leads to some of the problems that you are describing, where women really don't take hold of their talents and gifts and use them in the world?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I would say that I think all of us human beings play small relative to our strengths, relative to our gifts, to our dreams. But I think that there's an added layer for women, and that it's more pervasive and more severe for women. Some of that is good girl socialization, being told to not rock the boat, to not do anything that people around us won't like, to prioritize caring for others. Some of that is the lack of models that we have of empowered women in leadership and how that affects our self-concept. And then, of course, we face unique external barriers as well, whether that's unconscious bias from others or discriminatory policies or work-life issues. So all of that plays a role.
And I would think also that just because women are more conditioned to be perhaps taking care of others or caring about others, that there's also sometimes that need to please that comes up, that you think that you need to take care of everybody else first before you can actually take care of yourself.
Yeah, and you don't know how you can find the time to take care of everyone else and pursue your own playing big aspirations.
One of the things I think is really important that you talk about in your book is the whole inner critic, that we all have this voice in our head that seems to play nonstop, 24/7. What I like to say is that it's kind of like the ticker tape at the bottom of your brain. And when that comes up, people tend to just hear that. And could you tell us how you feel like women really get stopped by that inner critic?
Sure. Well, when I started coaching women, my clients were coming to me with lots of different problems. So maybe one was trying to make a career transition and wasn't sure how to do it, and another wanted to start a business and needed support, and maybe another was going through a big personal transition. And what fascinated me is that right when we got underneath that surface layer of what the particular problem was, the real underlying block was often the same across all those different issues, and that had to do with this inner critic voice. And most of us don't recognize the inner critic voice when it's speaking up. It's kind of become the background music that we live with, or the water that we swim in. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you over the years how many women have said to me, well, that's not my inner critic, that's just who I am. I just think that way. I just have that stream of thoughts in my head about how ridiculously large and flabby my upper arms look, or how I'm not a good public speaker, or I'm just a terrible negotiator, or I'm not ready yet to start that business maybe in 10 years. And so it really is a awareness process to realize, no, that's not just you. That's not the core of you. That's not the real you. That's a particular voice within you. And in fact, all of us have that voice. We can call it the inner critic. We can call it the voice of self-doubt or the monkey mind, lots of different terms we could use for it. But it is that voice that is caused by our fears of never wanting to take risks or leave the comfort zone. And then those fears, instead of just declaring themselves directly all the time, they kind of take on a more sophisticated costume or strategy. So instead of saying, no, don't do that, don't leave your comfort zone, they use a more intimidating argument, which is, you're not ready, you're about to fail, you know you're not good at that, you're going to make a fool of yourself, those kinds of things.
So does it serve a purpose?
It serves a purpose for the safety instinct part of us. So that part of us that would prefer to remain completely safe and cozy and never leave our familiar patterns, that part of us is trying to run the show with the inner critic. The other part of us that wants to experience fulfillment and growth and self-actualization is really not served by the inner critic, but is blocked by the inner critic. And interestingly, a lot of women think that they have to somehow get over having the inner critic because they know how much self-doubt is holding them back, or they see how much it's holding back their friends and colleagues. And I really take the opposite approach, that we don't have to get over having an inner critic. It's always going to be there. It's particularly going to be there if we're taking steps towards our dreams, or speaking up more, or expressing ourselves more in the world or in our work. It's going to talk quite strongly. What we do need to learn to do is to have a new relationship with the voice of self-doubt. We need to get really savvy about, oh, there it is again. That's what it says. I know it's not telling the truth. I'm not going to let it run the show. So it's really not about becoming confident, and I'm always dismayed when I hear people advising women to be more confident, because how the heck can we just do that? I think we can do something much more manageable, which is get smart about our self-doubt and learn how to not take direction from it, even when it's there.
So our self-doubt, it does serve a purpose, and I think it's very important for everyone to really see that it does protect us from possible danger that we think might be there, and it does keep us in our comfort zones or our safe zones. But what we have to be able to do is to identify it and then understand it, so that then we can choose our reaction to it and not just let it dictate to us.
Right. It has a protective impulse, but it's actually overprotective and overreactive. So, for example, if you're thinking of applying for a job that you think you would love, but that safety instinct part of you is like, I would rather avoid the uncomfortable moment that might happen when the recruiter calls you back and says, you're underqualified, or they didn't think that you had the right personality. The safety instinct's like, let's just avoid that whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not actually a serious danger that you need to protect yourself from. And if you protect yourself from all such dangers, you'll have a kind of stable but not very fulfilling life. It reminds me, actually, I have an 18-month-old son, and just last week we were at his pediatrician appointment, and we were talking about child-proofing and things like that. And she said, there's risks and there's hazards. And you want your child to take risks, because that's how they learn about their bodies and how to get down the stairs and all of that. But as a parent, you have to differentiate between the risks and the hazards, the really serious dangers. And I think it's actually very much like that in our adult lives, right? That we're kind of likely to see everything as a hazard. And we, in fact, want to identify those few hazards and then consciously take the risks that are in the service of our goals.
You also talk about finding your inner mentor and then really tuning into yourself and what is right for you by trying to listen to this as the older, wiser you. Can you go into that a little bit more and explain that?
Yes, this is one of my favorite things to bring to women, because I have watched it change so many lives and so many careers. It really is an incredible tool that we can all use in our lives. The idea here is that you can get a sense of an older, wiser, more authentic version of yourself. You, 20 years out into the future, more mature, more courageous perhaps, more authentically expressed as who you really are. And in the workshops and courses I do with women, we do a visualization so that you're not just thinking up, well, who would I like to be in 20 years? That probably won't be very fruitful, but you're really calming your body and going into almost like a meditative state so that the wisest part of you can bring you a vision of this older, wiser version of yourself. And what women often find there is a very vivid picture, a very inspiring and loving figure. And then we consult with our inner mentors. You can ask that older, wiser version of yourself, what would you do in this situation? Or how would you approach it? And the answers and the results are always really, really astounding. So this is sort of the complement, the opposite of that inner critic voice. And it's always there within us, but we have to work a little harder to hear our inner mentor. The inner critic is loud, and it will interrupt us, and it's chattery, and we don't have to invite it in. It'll show up. The inner mentor is more like quiet and sitting back and waiting for us to find her and to ask for her guidance.
I actually really like how you talk about it, that there are parts of us. And I think people forget that often, because I think once you hear that voice and it feels like it's all of you, it's that you should heed it, that it is the only voice that is in there. But when you talk about this, there are different aspects of ourselves or different parts of ourselves that we can either tune into or tune out of. So you're talking about this inner mentor. It can give you a different kind of path, and one in which you really see yourself being forward, that you're guided by a compelling vision rather than always feeling like you're being pushed or put down in some way by the negative critical voice.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, for me, a really important theme is women playing bigger on their own terms, and women not just exhausting themselves and striving to be successful within a model that was created by and for men, and a model that may not be very healthy for people or for our planet, but rather women saying, what does playing big mean to me? What does my playing big look like? And the inner mentor can really help us define that and then stay true to that. And what I found is, for some women, playing big, it is going for the promotion. For other women, it's turning down the promotion and really getting brave about the honest truth that that's not what they want to be doing with their time and energy. And for another woman, playing big might be getting out the novel pages from her dusty drawer and really taking herself seriously as a writer, even if it's something she's doing on the side of many other pursuits. So it really is self-defined, and the inner mentor can help us feel pulled towards that vision rather than pushing for an external, conventional definition of success.
So we've been talking about the voice in your head, but how should someone respond to the negative or even the positive feedback from others?
Yeah, well, this is such an important topic, and I found that when women were making that journey to playing bigger, whatever it meant for them, whether it was pursuing a business or an art or advancing within a company or organization, changing their relationship to praise and criticism was a really key piece for everyone, and it certainly has been for me in my journey too. A lot of us are really hooked on praise, particularly if we were good students in school and then high achievers. We really have gotten used to the idea that if we're doing good work, it's going to bring praise. And then we're really uncomfortable with criticism because it stings, because we've been told to be likable to everybody and not have conflict, and criticism can feel like it's creating conflict between us and that person who's criticizing. So a lot of my work is about helping women do what I call unhooking from praise and criticism, no longer getting hooked by it. And there's a few different things we can do. One of my favorites is to take any situation where you're getting feedback, positive or negative, and look at that feedback as only giving you information about the person giving you the feedback and not giving you any information about yourself. And that's a pretty radical idea. Lots of people say to me, well, no, Tara, isn't it both? It tells you a little bit about them and a little bit about you. Mm-hmm. And I really maintain that, no, the feedback we get really can only tell us about the person giving the feedback. In other words, if your boss tells you that you you could work on your presentation skills and there's a lot of room for improvement there, for example, if you take that personally, you'd interpret it as saying something about your ability to present or not. If you take that as telling you something about your boss, you would take that as information about what your boss is looking for in you, what your boss sees as adequate presentation skills for this role. So we don't interpret feedback that way to dismiss it. It's not like, oh, well, that's my boss's problem, so I don't need to care. It's more like, oh, this is information about someone that I need to work with, therefore I'm going to pay attention to it. And because we're not taking it personally, that frees us up. Instead of being wounded by it or avoidant of it, we can get really curious. What is this person telling me? What is the information here about how I can be more effective in working with them or influencing them? So that can be very, very powerful.
Well, and what I will say about that is that this is the number one hardest thing for people to do, men and women, is to actually believe that what somebody else says has nothing to do with them, because people tend to want to take it on a personal level, and then they start to defend and explain and try to justify themselves. So what I call this is moving from one mindset to a brand new mindset, that when and if that you can do this, then you're suddenly free to actually hear what somebody else says and to see it from their perspective, but also see that it's just their opinion or it's just their thought, but it is separate and different from you. So I totally think that this is a great point to make, and that people really need to be able to learn how to do this.
Yes. And sometimes you might hear the same feedback from 10 people, like 10 people are saying, you know, you don't seem present when I'm talking to you. You seem really checked out. And again, that doesn't mean they're right or wrong. It means something about how people are experiencing you, how you're coming across, and even understanding it as, oh, I'm getting some consistent feedback on my impact on others is very different than internalizing that as, oh, they're telling me something that's fundamentally true about me. And then you might want to go change and improve around your impact on others, but you're not taking it on as a statement that is fundamentally true about you. It's a statement about how others experience you.
Mm-hmm. We are going to take a short break, but we're going to come back and talk about the other ways in which women tend to self-sabotage themselves. I'm here with Tara Mohr, and we are talking about her book, Plain Big, Find Your Voice, Your Mission, Your Message. I'm Dr. Kim, and we'll be right back.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
Do you tend to hold yourself back because you don't believe you deserve to have it all? Do you tend to be your own worst enemy? Today, let's help you to reach your fullest potential. I am here with Tara Mohr. She is the author of Plain Big, Finding Your Voice, Your Mission, and Your Message. And we've been talking about different ways in which women sabotage themselves. And I have an email here, and I think it really follows along with this. So I thought I'd read this first. It's from Terry, and it says, "The voice in my head says, what right do I have to want more? On some level, it always seems like I am being selfish if I go after what I want and someone else is unhappy or disappointed that I am not there for them. A good example is my husband, who tells me that he likes me the way I am and I don't need to start a business venture because he can take care of the family and he wants me to be here for him and the family. How would you suggest that I deal with him? Is he my obstacle or is it me?" Terry.
Great. Well, I think the foundation of this journey is that inner critic and inner mentor work that we were talking about before. So one of the things I love to do with women around the inner critic is to have them start identifying that voice, identify all the things that they hear their inner critic saying. You can just even make a journaling practice of that over a few days or a week. And then start to notice, what's the personality of this inner critic? What are some of its most common lines? And if you were to create a character that were to personify your inner critic, what would that character be? Does it seem like a older female voice or a male voice or a teenage girl or a cranky child? How would you personify the voice? And then to start to think of those lines in your head as coming from that character. And that can be really powerful because it gives us a specific visual that helps us separate our core selves from this particular voice. It can also often add a lot of humor because the characters we come up with can be sort of extreme or ridiculous. And it puts us in more of the observer role and gives us some perspective on the voice. So in the case of this listener who called in, who wrote, the inner critic voice sounds like a common refrain for it is saying, you're selfish, you don't have a right to, and you just start to notice those as common lines. And then to turn to that inner mentor voice and to connect more with her. What's the playing big she's interested in? What's her perspective on what you deserve? What's her perspective on how starting a business might enrich your family, not take away from it? How would she approach the conversation with your husband? So you actually don't have to figure that all out on your own. You can use the inner mentor there to help you see some possibilities for that conversation that you might not otherwise be able to see.
You talk about also that women tend to perhaps be less direct, or they soften the way that they speak. What are some of the ways in which people do this so that even whether it's in their writing or whether it's in their speech pattern, that they have more difficulty coming across as assertive?
Yeah, I was just teaching a class about this this afternoon. So there are a lot of things that women do habitually in the way we speak and in our writing that, as you're saying, cause us to come across less competently and as less confident. So a few examples. Very commonly, we insert a lot of hedges into our speech. And hedges are those words that make what we're saying sound a little apologetic, more tentative. Things like just or actually, I just think, I just was checking in, I just wanted to throw that in there. Or, oh, I actually have a question. I actually disagree. Actually makes it sound like you're feeling surprised that you have a question or that you disagree. Or sometimes we say things like, I kind of think, or I almost wish we would, da-da-da-da-da. We also tend to apologize a lot more than we need to, apologize for things that don't really merit an apology. Some of us use uptalk, which is raising our pitch at the end of a sentence. So the same way that in English we raise our pitch at the end of a question to indicate that questioning, open-ended tone, like we'd say, so do you want to go to dinner? And our pitch goes up at the end. We can get into that uptalk, or sometimes it's called Valley Girl speak, where we're using that with our statements. I'm so grateful for this opportunity because I would really love to work at a place like this. And that makes our tone sound very questioning and uncertain. So there are all these kinds of things we do. We also do them in email and writing a lot. And sometimes we do them because we're feeling self-doubting in the moment and we're the inner critic voice is speaking. Sometimes we just do them because they're habit, and there's really no deeper meaning behind them, but we've heard other women doing them, and it's a little bit contagious and becomes the way we do things, and it does make us come across less powerfully. And interestingly, the research shows, I want to add this because I often get the question, but don't men use those things too? The research shows that when men use a lot of these same speech patterns, it doesn't have the same effect. That these hedging words or words that sort of shrink the import of what they're saying, because they are being received differently, and the stereotypes we hold about male leaders or men in the work world are different than those we hold about women. They just don't have that impact of undermining the perceived competence of a man, but they do that quite consistently for women.
Well, and for the most part, I think women are afraid if they do express themselves in this powerful way that they will engage in the negative stereotypes of being too aggressive, too bitchy, and so they tend to avoid that also.
Exactly. And it's important for us to know as women that that's not really about us actually being bitchy or aggressive. That, in fact, and again, there's lots of fascinating social science research that shows that women tend to be perceived as likable or competent, but not both, whereas men are often seen as both likable and competent. So we know that internally. We didn't need a research study to tell us that as women, although I think it's good to have the data. But we know that, if I push too far in just conveying competence and confidence and focusing on what I know and what I believe, I am going to be seen as less likable. Sometimes in our inner critic's voice, that can sound like, well, I don't want to be bitchy, I don't want to be aggressive, I don't really know, right? And so we often use these softeners so that we come across as more likable. But unfortunately, it does diminish our competence. So what I suggest we do instead as women is we need to think consciously about how we convey both warmth and competence in a positive way, not in a diminishing way. So conveying warmth and likability in a positive way would be, in a professional context, making sure we're making a personal connection, we're expressing interest in the other party, maybe we're being conscious of our body language and our facial expressions a little bit at the beginning, particularly at the outset of a professional interaction. That's when a woman's likability is being assessed. It's the first thing about her that's assessed. And it's assessed very quickly, like within a minute, by those that are observing her or meeting her for the first time. And then her competence is being assessed. And again, this is based on social science research of how we size up strangers. So you always want to think about making sure, particularly as a woman, that you're conveying warmth and friendliness and likability in the initial part of a meeting or interaction, just in the first couple minutes. And with that established, then you can really turn to focusing on conveying your competence.
So let's talk about how women can do this in the workplace and really make their own work more visible so that they're not being overlooked.
Yes, well, this is another topic that's really interesting, making our work more visible. As you might know, and I'm sure many of your listeners have heard the statistic, women are doing better than ever in school, and girls are outperforming boys in school. Young women are getting more years of university and advanced degrees than men are. We're performing better in those college and graduate degrees as well in terms of GPAs and graduation rates and so on. But one of the things that is really different between school and the work world is that for the most part when we're in school, we don't ever have to self-promote. We don't have to work the politics to make sure that people know about our good work. We don't have to make our work visible. We just kind of heads down, do good work, study for the test, turn in the paper. And then we get into the work world, and it's very different. It's not enough to quietly do good work. We kind of have to be aware that of how certain influential people are going to learn about our good work. So that gets into this whole realm of how do we make our work more visible. And that's very hard territory for a lot of women because we've been told not to brag, we don't want to take credit, we feel awkward, we don't want to play that stupid political game that we never liked anyway, we don't want to try and work the old boys club. We don't really even see our strengths a lot of the time, so we don't know what we should be promoting, all that stuff. And so I really recommend that women think about who do I want my good work to be visible to? How can it become more visible in a way that feels gracious to me and graceful and authentic to me? It's not going to be something that feels like bragging to you, but there are ways to share your accomplishments that feel like they can also be of service. For example, if you're leading a team and you've come up with some really great practices that your team uses for meetings or for project management that you know are helping you perform really well, you might think about, well, how can that be of greater service to our whole organization? How can I share more about what we're doing? How can I educate other teams on it or offer them our tools? That's going to be of service, and it's going to help make your good work more visible.
So in everything that you're saying, what I'm hearing is that if you are more focused on how you would like to show up for yourself and how, for instance, you'd like to do that promotion or that job, and that you're more in tune with doing it so that it makes you proud, that you like what you do, and less focused on what you think other people are going to think about it, you're going to be far ahead in this process you're talking about of being able to find your voice.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's really a reckoning with ourselves. For me, my big pivotal moment in my own journey to playing big was realizing, wow, I'm really letting my fears win out over my dreams. I have dreams of having a creative career, of writing, of doing work in the personal growth realm. And I am scared to death of that, and I am scared that I have no idea how to do it, and I'm scared that I am not good enough at it. And so I'm playing it safe, and I'm really, the phrase that came up so strongly for me at that time was, wow, I'm being more loyal to my fears than to my dreams. And that's still my favorite definition of playing big is it's when we become more loyal to our dreams than our fears. It doesn't mean achieving those dreams necessarily, but it's shifting where our loyalty is. And that is an inner game.
If it's true that women experience all of what we have just spoken about, why is it that they tend to criticize each other?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very related, and our playing small and our criticism of each other. And as I was on the book tour for Playing Big this fall and speaking to groups around the world, every single audience I spoke to in the Q&A, someone stood up and said, okay, I get what you're saying about all this work I can do internal to myself, but why is it that my toughest experiences with colleagues and bosses have been women? And why is it that women treat each other so poorly? And a lot of times people told stories and cried. There's a lot of undealt with pain around women's relationships to each other in the workplace. And I think that really the bottom line is this, that whatever a woman doesn't accept in herself, whatever dreams she has that she has not given herself permission to really have, whatever creative impulses she has that she's repressing or letting her inner critic talk her out of pursuing. Whatever she's squashing, she is not going to be able to support or even really witness in another woman. That will be too painful, and she will want to squash it in another woman. And a lot of times in the workplace, we also see senior women who, particularly in more traditional work environments, they just squashed so much of themselves to climb that ladder. And if they haven't gone back and felt the feelings around that and been kind to the younger self that kind of got squashed along the way, they are not going to be able to truly be very supportive and kind to the younger women in front of them.
I'm talking to Tara Moore, and she's the author of the book Playing Big. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
My guest for the hour is Tara Moore. She is a coach and leadership expert, giving women practical skills to voice and implement the changes they want to see in themselves and the world. You have some principles that you use for owning your brilliance and bringing it to the world. Can you share those with us?
Sure. This is my 10 Rules for Brilliant Women, which was published on Huffington Post several years ago and went viral and kind of continues to still go viral around the world. So we've talked about some of them today in other ways, but a couple more. One of them is to question the voice in you that says, I'm not ready yet. I think of the I'm not ready yet line as it's like a fancy costume that our inner critic wears. It sounds like a really good rationalization. Oh, I'm going to wait till I'm more ready. I'm checking in with myself, and I'm going to get a little more experience. But most often it really is the voice of fear and the inner critic. So I say, don't even try and assess how ready you are. If you want to do it, if you feel called to do it, if you dream of doing it, start to experiment with it and let the world give you the feedback on that. Don't conclude in your own head. Another one is to filter advice. I find that because as women we've been socialized, and many of us by nature are so relationship oriented, we love to gather feedback on our idea. We feel really good about asking other people for advice. But too often we then try and incorporate all of it, or we think that all of it has to be taken seriously by us. And we tend to not see some people's advice just isn't relevant for us. Sometimes they're threatened by what we're saying. Sometimes they want to remake what we're doing in a version that works for them. So really filter the advice. Pay attention to what feels right to you, what feels most useful to you, and don't be afraid to leave behind the rest. And then another is get a thick skin. And we talked a little bit about unhooking from praise and criticism. But the other aspect of that is that thick-skinned knowing of, if I am playing big, if I am saying anything substantial or creating anything that's making change in the world, I'm going to get praise and criticism. I'm going to have fans and people who don't like what I'm up to at all. And that might sound like common sense, but actually, if you've been a good girl, and especially if you've been a good girl who was sort of an achiever type in school, it's pretty revolutionary to realize, no, even if I do my work perfectly, it's going to bring a lot of criticism or pushback or people who don't get it or don't like it, and that's okay. I don't need to necessarily change anything about it.
Okay, and I think people will be able to get the rest of these on your website at...
Yeah.
Okay.
TaraMohr.com. MOHR.com, or you can just search for 10 Rules for Brilliant Women. And I also have a free 10 Rules for Brilliant Women workbook that you can download there. That's a really fun way to start applying the rules in your life.
Perfect. And I will also post that on my website.
Oh, great.
I would like to thank you very much for being here, but what I want you to let them know is you do have a Playing Big training program that is coming up. Do you want to tell us about that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So this fall, we're doing a new session of my Playing Big Facilitators training. And what's so great about that program is it's for women who want to play bigger and who want to help empower other women to do the same. So women who are managing others or working on a team or mentoring or teaching. Some women take it to inform their parenting of a daughter, or if you're a coach or a therapist, anyone who in some way in your work you feel part of your job is to empower and develop other women, or that's part of your passion. This gives you the tools to use the Playing Big model in your work as well as to apply it to yourself. And you can get information about that on my website, or if you sign up for the 10 Rules workbook, you'll be able to get further information about that as well.
Tara Mohr, thank you very much for being with us and for sharing all of this. I think it is very helpful, and I'm very thrilled to be a part of helping other women also in whatever way that I can for them to all reach their goals. So thank you for being out there and doing your part.
Your show clearly does that. Thank you for having me.
All right. I am Dr. Kim Taylor, and I'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
Thank you for joining me today. If you would like to contact Tara Mohr, I will post her information on my website at drkimtaylorshow.com. You can also listen to the rebroadcast of this show Thursday evenings at 10 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. right here at KZSB AM 1290. And you can also find past shows by going to iTunes or my YouTube channel for the podcast. Again, just go to my website and all the links will be there. So be well until next week, when I'll be right back here live at 5 as I am every Thursday. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor, and until then, remember, nobody else has to change in order for you to feel better. So what does the critical voice say in your head that tells you about yourself? You want to be mindful of this, for this is where the change really needs to occur. I want to thank my engineer, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.